Good morning, friends. Welcome to another online worship service this morning. Before we get started, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all of our amazing moms. Whether you are a mom, a grandmother, a cool aunt, or a crazy cousin, or just a best friend to our youth and our children, you are appreciated now more than ever, and we thank you for your time and efforts and just all that you do to create the families you're creating. So happy Mother's Day. Next, if you still have questions of how to give online during this time, you can go to fumcbrownwood.life, click on the Give tab, and customize your gift to the church. You can also see all of our video archives, our past sermons, if you'd like to get current on a certain message or topic that you have missed on social media. Now, I have two important dates for you. The first is Sunday, May 31st. We will be doing Hometown Donations of Hope. This will not be an in-person worship service, but it will be giving as an act of worship. So what we're going to do is on the 10th Street side of church, there will be boxes. And you can bring dry goods, canned food to donate to those in need as part of just our community outreach. Any additional items we have will go to Good Samaritan. The church is still formulating a list of needs, so be mindful of that. Look for that as you head to now do your online grocery shopping, so we can be prepared for that on Sunday, May 31st. Again, we'll be giving as an act of worship that Sunday together as a community. The second is our target date, June 7th. We are hoping to start in-person worship. We know that there will be a lot of restrictions. We will be very respectful of those. We want everyone to stay safe as we begin to slowly reemerge into in-person worship, but we are very hopeful that that date is now set, and we hope that that gives you hope and a little bit of joy today as well. So we will continue online worship for the foreseeable future. We want everyone to be comfortable, everyone to feel safe, but June 7th is our target date. So with that good news, Joey is now here to share our message, and we'll continue to worship together.
Hey, welcome again to today's online service. And before we get to the message today, we have a very special guest who's going to share with us just for a moment. So take a look at this.
Hey, how's it going, church? My name is Schaefer, and for the past 8 months, I have been down in Mexico working with a ministry called El Búho Cafe. We are a coffee shop in one of the best rock climbing places in the world, and so climbers come in from all over the world, and then all the money that we get as a coffee shop goes to building a local school in an impoverished area of Mexico. And so not only are we missionaries to the people of Mexico, but also to the climbers that come from all over. And so we try and form relationships by serving coffee and hanging out, but also by climbing with them in this amazing spot. And so by forming relationships, hopefully we can share the gospel and invite people into a relationship with Jesus. This was my first season there, and it was a truly, truly incredible time. I really got to see God's love for all people and got to see that God truly does care for everyone, and He invites us to be a part of that love and a part of that care. God did some really incredible things, and it was really cool to be a part of it. And so I'll be going back next season, back to El Búho Cafe to do it again. And so this summer, I'll be looking for support and just kind of sharing the message and sharing what God has done in the hopes of going back to Mexico next season. So I'll be back here in Brownwood in June and July, hopefully speaking in person at Bible studies and at church and going to lunch with people, just updating everybody. But thank you guys so much for your love and support and your prayers. I could not do what I do without y'all. You guys are my support network. You're my home base. And I truly love this church and these people. And God is doing something amazing, not just here in Brownwood and not just in Mexico, but all over the world. So thank you guys, and hopefully I will see you soon.
Well, welcome to our online worship service. It was really great to have Schaefer Church, our former youth director, back with us. We're excited this summer when he'll be back again to be with us, and it'll be a chance for him to speak to us and share about what his ministry has been doing. So a lot of fun to have him. We so appreciate Schaefer's heart and the investment he made in the lives of our youth during his time here. I have over the last few weeks been trying to inject a little bit of humor in the messages that we bring, because I think we need a little bit of humor right now. So I want to show you a cartoon that I came across, and you have to laugh here because it does depict probably one of the unintended consequences of the whole online worship thing at home with coffee and in your pajamas and all that. Now, I think it's possible that I've seen Mrs. Jones in the Brownwood Walmart, but when I saw her, she had on SpongeBob SquarePants pajama pants, and I don't remember the bunny slippers, but if you were to come back to church after the whole virus thing's over and we're able to come back and be in live, we would appreciate it that you not wear bunny slippers, and perhaps you should put on pants or something instead of your pajamas. So we hope you're starting to enjoy these and you got a fresh cup of coffee. And I want to share with you a few things. For the last several weeks, we have been looking at the deeper meaning of the worship songs that we sing in Common Ground. It was a series we called Songs of the Heart. And I want to mention it a little bit and then move on to a different topic today. But I want to say this: the atmosphere of corporate worship, the atmosphere of the corporate worship experience, I believe has an incredible opportunity or incredible ability for impacting our church at deep levels, for healing broken hearts, for lifting up a spirit of heaviness off the backs of those who are carrying huge burdens. And I just want to say this: I think it's important for us as we all kind of grow in our worship, because it was the whole point, right, of talking about the deeper meaning of our worship songs, that if we understand them more deeply and we worship with them more frequently in our private time, then we can grow and develop in our capacity to worship God with great passion. But I think it's important to know that when we get back together corporately on a Sunday morning, whenever that happens, that how each of us comes to worship is vitally important to the level of impact of what our worship services can and should be. I love the tagline that Wally Wood has put in all the worship videos that he's been putting out for weeks now, where he's asked people to share about their favorite hymn or their favorite worship song. And at the end, it just says this: spend some time in worship today. It's a great reminder for all of us that Sundays should not be our only worship experience, but that it really is an extension of, if you will, your private devotional worship life. We should come to the worship experience already worshiping, already having worshiped that week. So I just want to encourage you to kind of commit yourself afresh that what you do in your private worship time definitely has an impact, and we can all cultivate the spirit of worship a little bit more deeply by doing that. And I think this is the season, right, for us as God's people to grow in this area of our lives and in how it affects Common Ground and our church at large. Because I see this. I see a day when just walking into Common Ground is going to deeply impact people's lives. It will be like what it says in Acts chapter 3 when it describes this experience that God's people have. It will be times of refreshing. So we all can play into that. We all can sow and invest into that by spending time in worship today and continuing to be a part of that. So as we transition out of our series on worship songs, I really come today with just one primary purpose in mind. I want you to be encouraged. If there's anything that I've noticed when I've talked to people on the phone and visited with folks and tried to keep in touch with people is that everybody has had days where they felt a little despondent or anxious or other things because of the quarantining and the self-isolation and missing church and all of those things. And so, man, I just come today. I want you to be encouraged. You can expect that if you listen and invest this few minutes with me in this time together, that you're going to walk away from this feeling a little bit better. The way that I want to do that is by walking through the details of an incredible narrative in the Old Testament. This is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. For this story stands as a reminder that God does not forsake His people, and that the Father comes to His people in times of great crisis with a timely word that breaks open those things that make the experience new and fresh, and you're able to move on. It's a word, when God brings His fresh word, it's a word that penetrates our most painful set of circumstances. So this narrative focuses on the word of the Lord coming at a crucial time through the prophet Elisha, when God's people are facing severe depression and incredible lockdown circumstances that are overwhelming and kind of almost beyond comprehension. We'll get to those in just a second. And this story contains, I think, principles that can help us be encouraged, that are worthy of our attention. So buckle on, here we go. So as we dig into the story, I just want to say to each of you, hang in there. Hang in there. Come on, church. We got to continue to believe that in the midst of difficult circumstances that God will intervene and do things for us that we just simply can't do for ourselves, that we desperately need. You may be facing a tough situation, but I want to say to you, don't stop asking God for help. He is an ever-present help in times of trouble, the Scripture says. So in the midst of just horrific circumstances, God speaks through the prophet Elisha, and this is in 2 Kings chapter 6 and chapter 7. So the story begins in 2 Kings 6, verse 24, when it says that sometime later, this king came and he laid siege to the city of Samaria, and they could not get anybody in or out. And over time, this great famine comes, and it's so bad, and it describes it in language that would be hard for us to understand, but it's so bad that even just the most basic item, the price is so inflated, nobody can really afford it. And it gets to the point where there's no food, and I know if kids watch it today, I won't tell the whole details, you'll have to go read them in 2 Kings 6. That there's even some cannibalism that goes on. This is bad news. And God's people are trapped, and the king is upset. And the king overhears one of these conversations about this cannibalism that's going on, and he just tears his robe and he says, "May God deal with me, in a severe way if I don't take the head of Elisha." I mean, he blames it on the prophet. He blames it on God. And by the way, we need to all remember one of our tendencies when we get into the midst of tremendous trial is that we're ready to blame God for it. And we got to be careful about that. And so they send somebody to kill Elisha, but when he gets there, this is the moment in which God decides to intervene. And he comes and he speaks to Elisha. And here's what Elisha says in 2 Kings chapter 7. Hear the word of the Lord. For this is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. And, it's probably culturally a little tough for us, what he's talking about here. But in other words, what he's saying is the circumstances in which we find ourselves struggling and in crisis, by this time tomorrow, they're going to be completely flipped over upside down, and people can't believe what they're hearing. And then I want to mention, and I want to read a little bit of the rest of the story. In verse 8, so Elisha says that, and then in verse, I think it's verse 8, it says this, "Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate." I love that God interjects 4 lepers into the story of kings and prophets. And listen what happens to them. "And they said to each other, 'Why stay here until we die?'" Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we will die. If we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. And if they spare us, we live. And if they kill us, then we die. It seems like dying is the most popular choice on that multiple choice test. And at dusk, they got up and they went to the camp of the Arameans. But when they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there. Right? For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys, and they left the camp as it was, and they ran for their lives. The word of the prophet. By this time tomorrow, it's going to be completely different. And this is how God did it. So the men who had leprosy, right, reached the edge of the camp. They entered one of the tents, and check it out. Everybody else is starving to death, but the lepers do what? They go into the camp, and they ate and they drank, and then they took silver and gold and clothes, and they went off and hid them, then they returned and entered another tent, took some things from it and hid them also, and then listen to this. And then they said to each other, wait a minute, it's kind of like, that's not in the Bible right there, but it's like that, right? Wait a minute, what we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. So let's go at once and report it to the royal palace. And then the story continues to unfold. So what are some key ideas that I think we can draw from this? I want to begin by just pointing out the obvious. But this is good news if you catch it in your spirit. God is faithful to speak to us during desperate times. I don't know about you, but I've had some experiences in my life when it just looked like all the options are out and it had gone on far too long and I was at the end of myself and at the end of any advice people could give. I mean, it was just at the end. And I'm like, God, if you don't say something, if you don't intervene somehow, then it's over. This isn't going to happen. And this is a vivid narrative that gives us the context of this kind of situation. So God is faithful to speak to us during desperate times. I want to say to you today, if the virus or other situations or maybe circumstances even that don't even necessarily pertain to the virus itself, but you're in a tough situation right now, you can bet your money that God will speak to you during desperate times. And if God was able to do something, listen, in this situation where people were eating each other, where things were bad, if God's able to do something in this situation, He can certainly come now and do something in our behalf today. For it's safe to say that the faith of a people was definitely at a breaking point. The king was blaming it on Elisha, and everybody was, this thing's over. They were at this breaking point, but God's help always comes just in the nick of time in the form of a prophetic word containing a promise that breathes life. God is a God of word, and His word contains power. So is it even possible for me today in an online worship service to get a witness from those who have walked with God long enough to know that He always answers prayer, that He always comes through, and that He may become slower than what we wanted or expected, but He is always on time. I hope somebody's saying amen. So what's the first point? God's faithful. He is faithful to speak to us during desperate times. Secondly, this, God's promise comes without explanation of how it will be accomplished. Now, I want to bring this one up because I think it's a little part where we can sometimes get discouraged. Sometimes God might stir something in us or say something or speak something, and the problem is that when God's promises and His Word sometimes is so grand because it's spiritual that when it comes to us, we are trying to interpret it, understand it, assess it in a physical way, in a natural way. And it just doesn't work. And a lot of times when we heard something, we just say, how? I mean, when the angel Gabriel came to sweet little Mary, the mother of Jesus, and he says to her, you're going to give birth to the Messiah. God's going to be upon you. Remember what she said? How can these things be? I haven't even been with a man. The how kind of becomes a big deal. One of my favorite commentaries is called the McLaren commentary, and here's a quote related to this verse. Is it not the emphatic silence of the how that is a frequent characteristic of God's promises? Often, what's missing from God promising something is Him telling you how. And why is that? Because you have to have faith. You have to believe that it can happen even though it looks very impossible. A mentor of mine used to say to me all the time, he would say, listen, it's not about how, it's just about when. And that's kind of where we need to be. So I think one way you can tell that God has spoken to you in a difficult circumstance is that when you understand that this is being said to you, that the first question you say is, how in the world is that going to happen? That might be an indicator, almost a litmus test, that God is speaking to you. And we need to be content with the word that we've heard and not be running around nervously trying to figure out why, trying to figure out how. I mean, we know the why, but we can't just get stuck on how. There was an old timer I knew in a church when I was in college in this area, and one day he said to me, I don't think that guy's going to get both of those coons up the same tree. And of course I said, pardon me, what are you saying? And listen, sometimes when God comes with something, we're like, wow, that's amazing. But how are we going to get both of those coons up the same tree? It seems impossible, but with God, things are, all things are possible. With men, things are impossible. With God, all things are possible. So some of the things that you've been praying for the longest, when they come, they won't come quickly. But when they come, they will come suddenly, just like Elisha's word. By this time tomorrow, it's going to be a different game. And that's exactly what happened. I call those the suddenlies. Lots of people do. The suddenlies. And there's a Bible that says, and suddenly this happened, and suddenly that happened. A great example is this. The prophecies of Isaiah, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Of the increase of his government there shall be no end. A virgin shall give birth to a child. Those are Isaiah's prophecies 700 years before Jesus was born. And then what happened? And suddenly there were with the shepherds a host of heavenly angels saying, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Suddenly. Listen, I would love it to see some of you just get your suddenly. Like just out of the blue, suddenly that thing you've been praying for would come around. So where should we common ground? Where should we be finding common ground? By the way, it's common ground, no S. Common Grounds with an S is a coffee shop on Austin Avenue. And the reason that doesn't work is we don't want to find common grounds like a million things that, we're very diverse, but we find common ground, one central place, in the fact that we know that Jesus Christ changes lives. That's our common ground. So where should we find the common ground? How about this? We believe in the promises of God, and we believe that He shows up in people's lives when they need Him the most. So some of the aspects of following God require that we relinquish our need to know the details of how it would happen, but we just trust in who has said it will happen, and that's enough for us. Point number 3, the ones who were willing to take the biggest risk got to enjoy the spoils first. So 4 lepers, right? Unlikely characters. We're talking about kings and prophets and all this, and then they go, oh, by the way, there were 4 lepers on the edge of the town. And there's something about these men and the language that they use that is so compelling to me. I mean, these guys are saying, if we die, we die, but let's not just sit here. I wonder that sometimes one of the most compelling things that we can do is quit just sitting there, but do something. Give some money away. Call a neighbor. Go mow a widow's yard. I mean, go down to Good Samaritan and volunteer some time. Quit living your faith in your thought process in your head. Do something. And if you get embarrassed, you're embarrassed. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But at least do something. Try something. Why do we just sit here till we die, they say? Why? And they talk to each other. Let's do something. I love the story that chooses the most unlikely of people to play a major role in the story. And isn't it great that these guys, think about, we know the tradition, the culture is that if you were a leper and you walked into a place, walked into a city, you had to yell out 3 times, unclean, unclean. So these guys had lived their lives kind of being shunned by society and all that. But the lepers are the ones who go in and find that the promise of the prophet, the word of the prophet has become true, and they find enough bounty for the entire city, food and wealth and gold and jewels and all those things. So when you become a person who takes the right kind of risk, I think there's an abundance that comes to you sometimes. But then you have to realize, as these guys did, that it's not just for you. Don't you love the story? So they get out there and they ate and drank, and everybody else in the city is suffering from a famine. The city's been under siege all this time, and these 4 lepers are enjoying the spoils of this warfare that God had done in behalf of His people. And they're eating and drinking and getting jewels. And then you got to love it. It says that they kind of came to themselves, and you get to that point. It says what we're doing is not right. Now that's not hard Hebrew theology. What we're doing is right. It's just not right what we're doing. This is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves. You know what the problem with the church is some days? we're like those lepers before they kind of came to their senses. We're enjoying the good news while people down the street, right down 11th and 10th Street, right here by the high school, and across town on the north side, people who don't know Him, who don't even know that it's possible to know Him, and who I hope are listening to what I'm saying today, because I want to say this: you can know Him. And there are people that I know that kind of have a leprous spirit, if you will. So these guys had this horrific skin disease. They came in, wherever they went, they had to go unclean, unclean. But there are people that I know that everywhere they go, they kind of say it in a way: I'm unclean. I'm unclean. You don't know where I've been. You don't know what I've done. Man, I come from quite a background. You should know my family. Look at all the things I've done, how I've messed things up. I mean, it's unclean, unclean. And God says to you that He wants to do exactly this for you. He wants to be the one who comes to you and speaks a word of life and healing and hope. And you can find a place at our church here today. I can tell you right now, we take people right where they are. You don't have to come in the right clothes. You can come in your bunny slippers if you want to. Come on down. This is a church that loves people right where they are, and we don't want for 1 second to be a people that have heard the good news and been changed by the good news and have been living in the good news and going to Bible studies and singing songs and hymns that we love all this time. But we want to be a people that know that's not right, that we want to share and do that. And I'm so proud of our church, all our members that go out and work with Good Samaritan. We have so many members that work on volunteer on a regular basis with Good Samaritan and with Food for Thought and other things. But we've just got to have that spirit. So we have to realize whenever we do take a risk and we get to enjoy the spoils first, because we're the ones that jumped out there, that maybe in the middle of consuming that and enjoying the spoils of where we've gone, that we have to stop and say, this is not right. I can't just have it for myself. But that we've been given the good news so that we can share it. And so I just want to say to anyone that might be listening, that if you're thinking, I don't know about this church business. I've never been to a church. I wasn't raised in church. I've partied pretty hard. I've been arrested before. I've had, I've been around lots of people who kind of felt that way about church. I just want to say, you don't have to know the Bible. It doesn't matter that you have a past. You don't have to have the right personality or some sort of experience with God or knowledge of Scripture. You didn't have to grow up in church. None of those things have to be true. But we invite you to come. So if there's any common ground, for us at Common Ground, it ought to be this: that none of us deserve what God's done for us. His mercy has come to us, and we just had to receive it, because we've come to know that He is a good Father. So what can we take away from this today? First of all, if you come in your bunny slippers, make sure you don't have on SpongeBob SquarePants pajamas. Just kidding. What are the things we take away? First one, this: God will speak to you when you most need it. And I want to remind you of this. We talk about discipleship. It's one of the words, just learning to follow Jesus. That's all that means. And I want to say this, that the essence of discipleship is to teach people to hear God for themselves. Secondly, this: when God does speak, He is not obligated to tell you how He's going to accomplish it. And if you know why, it's because He loves you, because He has a purpose for your life, and you don't know when. I mean, when's just one of those things you just got to wait, because God has a perfect plan and timing. So don't worry about it. All you need to know is the who. And the who is the Father, and the why is because He loves you, and so the how will work itself out in time. And the third one is this: don't be surprised if God inserts people into your story who don't seem to belong. In Common Ground, we should not be surprised if God inserts into our church story people who almost don't seem to belong. But we want to say, man, we are so glad when people come that can come and help us learn things that we don't know, because we don't want to be just an homogenous group of people that all act and talk alike. We welcome diversity. Well, I just have to tell you, I feel so blessed to be serving as the associate pastor here at First United Methodist Church. FUMC Brownwood has been such a blessing to me and has stood with me this last year in ways that almost didn't even know were possible, so I'm so grateful for you. I believe our future as a church is bright, that we have a lot to look forward to. So I hope you'll keep worshiping at home. I hope you'll be encouraged and remember that God is going to speak to you in those moments when you most desperately need Him. So thank you today for being a part of this online worship service. You have a great week, and we'll see you next time.